Salman Khurshid, Honorable Union Minister, Corporate Affairs and Minority Affairs, and our chief guest for the evening. It is our privilege indeed to have you fly in from the capital and spare some time to be with us. Mrs. Khurshid, we are delighted that you could also join Mr. Khurshid to grace this occasion. Mr. O.P. Bhatt and your colleagues from the State Bank of India, Business India's Best Bank 2009. Congratulations to you all on being the recipient of this year's award. Mr. Rajkumar Dhoot, Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha. Mr. Ashok Jha, Chairman, MCX Stock Exchange, our presenting sponsor of the event. Mr. Venugopal Dhoot, Chairman, Videocon Limited, our principal sponsor. Mr. Salil Parekh, CEO, Capgemini India, our co-sponsor. Your Excellencies, the ambassadors and consul generals who join us this evening. The many chairmen and senior executives of Business India's Best Bank distinction from the past who have gathered here this evening. Members of the jury that selected the Business India Best Bank 2009, who include Mr. A.K. Khandelwal, former Managing Director, Bank of Baroda. Mr. Leo Puri, Managing Director, Warburg Pincus. Mr. Praveen Kadle, Managing Director, Tata Capital. Mr. Sanjay Nair, Chief Executive, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, India. And Mr. Vimal Bhandari, Country Head, Aegon, India. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business India Best Bank 2009 award ceremony. This is the 10th year since the inception of this honor, and we are delighted to have you here with us this evening to celebrate this wonderful occasion. A celebration of what is most certainly the country's single most coveted recognition for the banking community. My name is Ashiana Dillon, and I will be taking you through tonight's proceedings, which promise to be a hallmark event in the financial and business world in India. This is the first time since the inception of the award 10 years ago that Business India has organized a formal award presentation. In the past, the honor of being nominated Business India's Best Bank and being featured on the cover of the magazine was sufficient enough of a tribute. And while the very fact of being selected is a most prestigious honor, our readers and well-wishers have persuaded us to celebrate this special occasion in a special way. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at the very first award function of the 10th Business India Best Bank Award. May I now request Mr. Ashok Advani, Chairman and Publisher of Business India Publications, and Mrs. Feroza Bilamoria, Managing Director of Business India Publications, to please escort to the stage the Honorable Union Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Mr. O.P. Bhatt, Chairman, State Bank of India, and Mr. Rajkumar Dhoot, Member of Parliament. Please. Ladies and gentlemen, each year, Business India recognizes a bank that has stood out amongst the over 80 public sector, private sector, and foreign banks in the country. This is the first award that looks beyond the numbers and selects the winner on qualitative parameters as well as financial performance. Thus, Business India's Best Bank Award has come to be regarded as the most coveted of its kind in India, and the announcement of its recipient is eagerly awaited every year. I would now like to request Mr. Ashok Advani to come and address his distinguished guests.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Business India Publications, I want to welcome all of you to the Best Bank Award for 2009. Want to add my personal welcome to Mr. Salman Khurshid, who's come down with Mrs. Khurshid, Mr. Bhatt, who's here with Mrs. Bhatt, and so many friends, Mr. Rajkumar Dhoot, Rajya Sabha MP, who's also kindly agreed to speak today. Our other sponsors from MCX Stock Exchange, Mr. Ashok Jha, Mr. Massey, and Mr. Salil Parekh from Capgemini. A warm welcome to all of you once again, and thank you for being with us. As Ashiana said, this is the first time we're having a function on this scale for the Best Bank Award. And I think it's fitting that State Bank should be the bank that is selected for this year's award. When we launched the Best Banks Awards 10 years ago, we looked at the option of how to select the best bank. We looked at the various options and thought, should we go strictly by numbers? But then when you look at some of the relevant parameters, like capital adequacy, we found that a small bank, foreign bank, that rarely borrowed or lent, ranked number 1 on capital adequacy. But was it a bank at all if you don't borrow or lend? Nor is it just a question of size. Otherwise, State Bank would be the winner every year. So we at Business India believe that numbers have their place in any analysis. But there's a world beyond numbers. And all of us know that all the smart young whiz kids who are very good at numbers built up a whole financial pyramid based on numbers, and that hasn't got us very far either. There are some popular international quantitative methods. They're useful as a guide, but they're not gospel. In any case, in India, we have our own highly regulated environment in India. So we found it much better to have a panel of experts on banking. Each year, we create a selection panel that shares their depths, their insights on the industry, and their experience. They're able to eliminate some contenders because of their specialist and sometimes even inside information. And frankly, that is what allows us to stick our necks out and, using the numbers as a guide, to go into the qualitative aspects of the bank and select our best bank for the year. Of course, given the limited number of banks in India, we cannot set a norm as we do for Businessman of the Year that a bank cannot win an award a second time. Obviously, last year's choice continues to do well. But by the very nature of awards, it makes sense to choose another bank to highlight its achievements in that period to the public. And since this is a qualitative assessment, the bank needs to have done particularly well to feature on the list again. In the last 10 years, State Bank has won this award, has won this distinction 3 times. So does it make sense then to have a Best Bank award every year? The answer is yes, because contrary to public perception that banking is a slow-moving business in which little change takes place, actually, it is a dynamic and very fast-moving business. As I said earlier, the events of the last year have shown that financial adventurism and excessive risk-taking by bankers, driven by only commission and profits, can bring the whole financial world down. Everyone has been made only too painfully aware of the havoc that a loosely regulated and over-leveraged financial system can bring about. In India, our government has taken the position that it was nationalization of the banks and very conservative policies followed by the Reserve Bank of India that has saved India from being dragged down by the financial tsunami. Worldwide, the biggest banks have large government stakes today. In the US and UK, this happened due to the financial crises. But in France, that was always the case. Singapore's biggest banks are also controlled by the government through Temasek, its holding company. And of course, the big Chinese banks are all government controlled. Thus, India is not the only country where government exercises ownership and control over the largest banks in the country. But having said this, let me say frankly, and with due respect to the Minister, that Business India has always argued against government ownership of banks. And our opposition is not a purely ideological one. In practical terms, governments should not be running airlines, insurance companies, banks, or other such services. For example, if the government is not in stockbroking, then why should it be handling loans and deposits? And in any case, for those who want it, the post office is always there for small savings. The markets have very well understood the potential wealth creation of very well-run independent banks. For example, the State Bank of India is one of the most heavily traded shares on the Bombay Stock Exchange or on the National Stock Exchange, and has always been a market leader. But in spite of being a world-class bank, it still trades at 1/4 or 1/5 of the PE of its competitors like HDFC Bank. And as we've pointed out again and again, the salaries of the chairman of SBI or the nationalized banks are about 1/10 of what some of the bankers in HDFC and ICICI earn, let alone the foreign banks. 100, that's foreign banks is for 100 times, correct. That's I put that in the letter from the publisher. But as Indians, we adapt remarkably. And until there's a political consensus on raising salaries in government, it won't happen. Similarly, unless there's a political consensus on dropping the government holding below 50%, it will not happen. The chairman of SBI and his colleagues accept this political reality and perform at a very high level of competence and compete strongly and effectively both with foreign and private banks. I might add that most chairmen of the State Bank of India have also very successfully stood up to pressure from the majority owner, that is the government. The reasons are not far to seek. What matters is really the quality of the people running our banks, particularly the State Bank of India. At Business India, we have pointed out on many times that India's banking tradition is the oldest in the world. We continue to produce bankers who staff the major banks of the world, even at the CEO level. We honestly believe that in spite of all the handicaps of excessive RBI control and government ownership, Indian banks, willy-nilly, are going to emerge as major international banks. But just as our software industry has shown, we can become bankers to the world. In fact, at Business India, we've argued again and again that banking can be a bigger story than software. It is for this reason that we continue to select the best bank of the year every year. And State Bank has fit the bill eminently. It has over 200,000 employees. And through rapid branch expansion, the number has touched almost 12,000 this year. It's the first Indian bank to have achieved this number, and the second in the world after a Chinese bank. It has 15,000 of the total 45,000 ATMs being run in the country. And by March 2010, the number will go up to 25,000. All of these details you will get when you pick up the magazine on your way out after dinner, which highlights State Bank's strengths and the contribution that Mr. O.P. Bhatt is making to develop this rich legacy. So I won't repeat what we have written. But all I can say is that we're delighted to have the State Bank of India as our best bank of the year and to have Mr. O.P. Bhatt here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Advani. Distinguished guests, we have a little surprise for you this evening. Tonight, we will be unveiling the report on World Retail Banking 2009, presented by Capgemini and UniCredit. Capgemini is one of the world's foremost providers of consulting, technology, and outsourcing services. A $13 billion company with presence in over 30 countries and 90,000 people worldwide, and a pioneer in the IT industry, Capgemini has over 40 years of global expertise, collaborating with leading corporations across financial services, telecoms, manufacturing, energy and utilities, government and the public sector. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Salil Parekh, CEO of Capgemini's Financial Services India, Asia Pacific Strategic Business Unit, please to the stage. Mr. Parekh is a member of Capgemini's CEO Committee and Global Executive Committee. With Capgemini since 1992, Mr. Parekh has worked in New York, Mumbai, and London, holding key positions such as CEO of Capgemini's North America business and CEO of Capgemini's Global Technology Services business. Mr. Parekh.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce to you today Capgemini's World Retail Banking Report. The past year has been tumultuous, as I'm sure each of you can attest to from your own experiences. I hope you will find value in the findings that the report are presenting, whether they relate to the changes in the business model, the changes and ups and downs in the pricing of products and services, the approach to cross-selling, risk management, or compliance. In this environment, I am proud that Capgemini is associated with the Best Bank Award event. On behalf of Capgemini, and indeed for me personally, please accept our congratulations, Mr. Bhatt, to yourself and to State Bank of India, and a very successful award ceremony. If I can request the Honorable Minister to launch the report on behalf of Capgemini. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the unveiling of the World Retail Banking 2009 presented by Capgemini and UniCredit. Thank you, Mr. Parekh. Ladies and gentlemen, they say an award is only as good as those who made the selection. At Business India, we have always maintained that what distinguishes an award is the caliber and respect that the members of the selection panel command amongst their peers. Each year, Business India makes sure that the panel to select the best bank is extraordinary. And this, the 10th year, was no exception. The panel to select this year's recipient met on Saturday, the 4th of July, and comprised of Mr. A.K. Khandelwal, former Managing Director, Bank of Baroda; Mr. Leo Puri, Managing Director, Warburg Pincus; Mr. Praveen Kadle, Managing Director, Tata Capital; Mr. Sanjay Nair, Chief Executive, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, India; Mr. Vimal Bhandari, Country Head, Aegon, India. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Leo Puri, Managing Director, Warburg Pincus, and a member of the Best Bank 2009 selection panel, to come to the podium to say a few words on the selection process.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to stand here and share with you the thought process that the panel went through. Let me say at the outset that we had total freedom. We were not guided or nudged, even gently, by Ashok through the process. So the outcome is entirely the responsibility of the panel. As has been mentioned earlier, we were conscious of the fact that we were sitting in the backdrop of what has probably been the worst financial disaster since the 1930s. We were in a position to survey the wreckage of the global financial system, some of the debris of which had washed up on our shores. And we were conscious that we were making this decision in what indeed had been very unusual times. And as we surveyed the landscape here, we could see some foreign banks which were pulling in their horns despite years, indeed in some cases, centuries of commitment to India. We could see the uncertainty in their strategies as they went about their business. We could also see that the foundations of some of the banks in the private sector had been exposed as perhaps a little weaker than their ambitions might have desired. And we could also see that in the public sector, there were a number of banks that were paralyzed, waiting for direction, and submitting themselves in a passive sense to the inevitable pushes and pulls of policy in a crisis-ridden environment with a government that clearly needed all the help it could get. And as we surveyed this, one of the things that began to emerge was that there was one bank that was benefiting from some of the tailwinds, no doubt, because it was a bank in the public sector. So yes, indeed, it did have more than an implicit bank government guarantee. Yes, indeed, it was benefiting from a massive flow of liquidity. And yes, indeed, it did benefit from a very obliging shareholder in the form of the government that stood up and subscribed to its rights issue. But what impressed us more was not just the inevitability of the State Bank of India being able to withstand the storm. That I think we knew it would do. It was the fact that this was a bank that had seized the moment and had sensed an opportunity precisely in the midst of the wreckage. And as we began our discussion, we went through the achievements of this bank, and we realized that in most spheres, it had done more than merely stand still. It is very easy in a time of crisis with bank guarantees to essentially retreat into a low beta, low innovation entity with mediocre talent and essentially the socialization of credit. Indeed, that is a worry that many banks that have now taken financial capital from governments around the world are facing. And there is a serious concern as to what this means for the future of banking. And in the final analysis, what impressed us was that this bank had actually stood up, whether it was in the way it was serving rural India, whether it was in the way it was supporting the absolute titans of corporate India, whether it was the extent to which it was supporting India's international commitments and the obligations that we had to our trading partners, and whether it was in the way it was broadening its wings to build successful businesses in life insurance, credit cards, mutual funds, and elsewhere. So indeed, if we had merely seen an entity that was standing still, and we were conscious that one of the obvious criticisms would be, well, isn't it natural that a bank that has the government behind it would be an obvious beneficiary in a time of crisis? But we clearly saw much more. And so, ladies and gentlemen, really it is a tribute to the fact that we saw a bank that was making the most of the moment, that was not merely degenerating into a socialized credit model, but that has been able to stand up and actually regain in some ways the pride of being a bank. I commend the bank to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Puri. And thank you, members of the selection panel. Our recipient of the 10th Business India Best Bank Award, the State Bank of India, is privileged to have been selected by such an august jury. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now proceed to the part of the evening that we've all been waiting for our chief guest, the Honourable Minister, to address us. But before that, may I call upon Mr. Rajkumar Dutt, member of the Rajya Sabha, to please introduce our chief guest. We are privileged to have with us tonight Mr. Rajkumar Dutt, member of the Rajya Sabha. Elected to the Rajya Sabha since April 2002, he's been a member of several parliamentary committees, including the Standing Committee on Finance, the Consultative Committee for the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, a permanent special invitee on the Consultative Committee for the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and the Committee on Commerce, amongst several others. Promoting education amongst girls by running a girls' high school at Gangapur for 1,100 students, and running a multi-speciality charitable hospital at Aurangabad, the Nandlal Dutt Charitable Hospital, with 60 facilities for cancer, cardiac care, and allied treatment, are only some of the commendable achievements in the social arena by this distinguished MP. Mr. Dutt, may I request you to please take the podium?
Honorable Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, ladies and gentlemen of this distinguished audience, Mr. O.P. Bhatt and your colleague from the State Bank of India, Business India's Best Bank for 2009, and esteemed member of the jury that selected the winner of Business India Best Bank 2009. It is my proud privilege to introduce the personality who has graced today an august gathering of Chief Guest Mr. Salman Khurshid, the Union Minister of Corporate and Minority Affairs. There are several reasons why Salman's presence is important for our present occasion. He has been active in the country's public landscape for almost 2 decades now, after having been first elected to the Lok Sabha in 1991. Of course, he brings a rich legacy to this role, being the grandson of Dr. Zakir Hussain, President of India, and the son of another eminent parliamentarian, Mirza Khurshid Alam Khan. While belonging to this strong lineage in the Indian parliamentary system, Salman himself is the example of the kind of his educated, forwarded, looking political leaders that people of this country look forward to. He has studied at the Delhi Public School and St. Stephen's College at Oxford. Mr. Salman's own career to span significant phases in the Indian parliamentary practices and governance. In recent time, he has served as an officer on special duty in the Prime Minister's office during the Prime Ministership of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Later, when our country began to economically open out to the world, Mr. Salman served as the Minister of State for External Affairs in 91 to 96. During his tenure, one of the most notable feats by Mr. Salman was to defend and protect India's record of human rights in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and in integrating the minority section of India's population into a domestic system in face of strong diplomatic offensive by Pakistan and multilayer forum. In doing so, Mr. Salman showed his ability to work in the national interest across party lines. Mr. Salman has a strong background as a professional in the more conventional sense of the term too. He is an eminent lawyer and has also served as the CEO of the Indian Army of Multinational Information Technology Arm. Many people in the August Assembly have strong expectation from the Minister for Corporate Affairs, and all of corporate India has strong reason to have such expectation. We must remember that he brings political and diplomatic skills to all the sensitive requirements of this task. People with such high skill in public life are rare. People who combine them with the skills in personal life are even rarer. In his college days, he was noted for playing the role of Romeo in stage plays organized by Stephen Shakespeare Society, and continues his engagement with the theatre. He loves music as well as cooking in a fine Sunday lunch. In fact, I am looking forward to an invitation from him for a delicious Sunday lunch. May I get, sir? I'll ask for a loan. For all these reasons, it is my privilege to present Mr. Salman Khurshid, our Minister for Corporate Affairs and Minority Affairs, before this distinguished audience at Business India Best Bank 2009. Thank you. Jai Hind.
My good friend, Mrs. Parekh, Mr. Leo, who obviously knows much more about my talents than I do myself, and Mr. Ashok Jha, and most important of all, for tonight's event, and indeed, I guess, for millions of people, not just the jury here, not just the peers of Mr. Bhatt, but I think for millions of people who repose their faith in the State Bank, the prime mover, the conceiver, the visionary who's given State Bank this very special place in our economic things, Mr. O.P. Bhatt. I had a good fortune to spend some time with him recently in the company of none other than the finance minister himself. We traveled together to a distant place, Murshidabad, and from Murshidabad I saw Mr. Pranab Mukherjee press a button and energize the whole country with God knows how many ATMs and branches of State Bank. And a very, very demure and a very modest Mr. O.P. Bhatt said, I thought it was less than that, but my colleagues have obviously done a better job. And so the printed form, the printed catalog said far less than they were actually on the press of the button were presenting to the people of this country. And I think that's wonderful. That shows the strength of an organization. I've been accustomed to government organizations where you say there will be 20 items, and then you're agonizing 5 minutes before the items are to be produced why there are only 18 and not 20. And here, he was actually being modest when he gave a figure, and by the time we actually got to Murshidabad, between landing in Kolkata and arriving in Murshidabad, the numbers had actually gone up. And I'd imagine you couldn't have found a better person than this man from the mountains, part of Uttar Pradesh that's been carved away from my state. I can't say today proudly that he's from my state, but I can say proudly that he's from my country, my beautiful country. And when members of the jury looked at all the factors that have been considered, particularly about the possible impact of being a banker and being a bank that's backed by implicit and explicit government support in times of crisis. If I'm not wrong, the story of State Bank's revival started long before the story of the American bank's decline began. And the important thing is that having started with that story, when the crisis came, it wasn't as though it was a good times bank. It was actually a good times bank that was just as good in tough times. And I think that's possibly what's very significant on this occasion. Now, when I speak to so many bankers, and some very distinguished bankers lined up here, I mean, if you were to count the amount of money all of you control, this would be an enormously rich place. It may not be all your own money, somebody else's money, but certainly you do control a lot of money. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm addressing people who can, with a flick of their pen or finger, change the destiny of so many people. And I must say that I have to fall back on a favorite anecdote of mine, because I think it will sum up what I want to say, or I don't want to say. And that's the story of Mullah Nasruddin, no great banker himself. A great borrower, I believe, but no great banker. Mullah Nasruddin was once asked to speak to a very distinguished audience like you are. And he didn't really know what to say, because I do know that everything that has to be said tonight has to be said by Mr. O.P. Bhatt. So on a similar occasion, Mullah Nasruddin, not knowing what to say, simply stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, do you know what I'm going to say?" And everybody said, "No, we don't." He said, "I do not wish to speak to people who don't even know what I'm going to say." And off he went. And off he went. So like Mr. Advani says, this is the 10th year, right? And everyone said, "Okay, next year we'll get him." And he was called the following year. He stood up again and everybody said, "So, Mullah Nasruddin." So he said, "So you know what I'm going to say?" And everybody said, "Yes, of course we know." He said, "Well, then I need not say it." And off he went. So people said, "Now this is too much. This is really too much. We've got to call him back again." So he was called again. And people had prepared like you are, sitting with an aisle in between. Half the lot said, "We will say we know," and the other half said, "We will say we don't." So then he'll have to choose and he will have to speak. So he stood again and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, do you know what I'm going to say?" Half said, "Yes, we do." The other half said very grimly, "We don't." So he paused and said, "All right, then I think what we should do is those who know will please tell those who don't, and my job is done." Now, when I'm in such a distinguished gathering of bankers, frankly, and that you have gathered here, bankers and people from finance sector, and you've gathered here to honor a peer amongst yourself, for in 10 years, third time to have won an award, State Bank. I think it's a wonderful thing. You must be trying so hard not to give this award to the State Bank, because you don't want to feel that there's some match fixing, that State Bank just comes and gets the award every year. But I do realize that it must have been a very difficult exercise. And I do know that when bankers look at a piece of paper and they have to decide what to do, how careful they are and how they scrutinize and how they can find fault with the smallest thing. But it's great that despite everything and despite the natural reservation one has about giving it to the same person again and again, doesn't apply in politics, by the way. I'm quite happy if you give it again and again. In politics, So as long as we are on the winning side. So despite everything, you're having finally once again said it's the State Bank, and State Bank under Mr. O.P. Bhatt, I believe is a wonderful, wonderful choice. And I say this because State Bank represents for us in many ways one significant message of New India. I asked Mr. Bhatt, how did you do it? Did you get in people from somewhere else? Did you get the pick of the banking sector and bring them here? Did you just change everything completely? And he said, no, I just felt that I needed to talk, and I spent hours on end just talking to my people, just talking to them, bonding with them, and giving them a sense of belonging and feeling that if they wanted, they could do it. Much like, an Obama factor in banking. Yes, we can, he said, and so they did. And I think that's the wonderful thing about modern India, that there are now so many people becoming role models of the confidence to say we can, and then that happens. Many things that years ago we felt couldn't happen are now happening because somebody stands up and says, no, we can do it, and we will do it. And I think it's wonderful. And it's wonderful. And today we stand, despite the challenge of a bad monsoon, despite the challenge of recession in the world, despite the challenge of constant inflationary pressures, despite our ambitious commitment of social welfare and not being prepared to make any cuts in social welfare, despite the requirement periodically to step in with special packages to help our economy and prevent it from floundering, I think that we still can stand with a great deal of confidence and say that India is on the move and will remain on the move. But as we say this, and being in government and sharing with you a sense of partnership and belonging, I do want to say that we have some challenges for which we must prepare ourselves politically, psychologically, and we must prepare ourselves intellectually. And the challenges are not far away. They are across the border. China is a challenge. And China is a challenge, and I believe a welcome challenge, but for the challenge that China offers to us in trade, but for the challenge China offers to us in international investment, but for the challenge that China offers us in institutions such as banks, we might have become complacent. And today, as I understand, the backing that the government of China, the government of the People's Republic of China gives to its banks when they go foraging outside in the rest of the world, when they go head hunting, when they go hunting for territory, when they go hunting for area, China is there. And I think that this is some hesitation that we must come over. I do remember my first stint in government began at a time when we were just coming out of a phase where we were reluctant and shy to carry businessmen with us to the rest of the world. Government people were supposed to stay away from business, and business people were supposed to stay away from government. Business was something bad. And of course, equally, I thought business must have felt government was something really bad. And then it changed. And then it really changed, and I discovered with great pleasure that I traveled to Central Asia, where the one thing that they didn't know was banking. They had everything in Central Asia, just been emancipated from control of Soviet Union, become independent countries, very vibrant, wonderfully charming countries that had great amount of affection for India, countries that were on the move. They had infrastructure that Soviet Union had given them. They had oil, they had gas, they had everything. But two things they didn't have was, one was their knowledge of contract, and the other one was their knowledge of banking. They would just carry everything that they had in terms of money in their pockets, and they would just take that money everywhere, and at best they would put it under the mattress. The best bank they knew was the mattress, and look under the mattress, and there was money. Value of money was barely more than the value of the paper it was printed on. but they had a sense that they wanted to learn, and they wanted to institutionalize their economy. And the only thing they would say to all the businessmen who traveled with me for the first time, and we chartered a plane, for the first time 15 business people traveled with me, and everywhere when I would introduce our delegation, there were not just officers, colleagues from the Foreign Service and from the Ministry of Commerce, but they were businessmen, captains of industry at different levels. And every time someone spoke to us, they would say, please give us an Indian bank. And truly, I think that was, in a sense, for them, a window to the world. And similarly, it's a window to the world for us, but a different kind of window, a French window perhaps, that we have to go out and tell the world, not just that here is an Indian bank, but to tell the world, here is an Indian bank that can do business for you and that can do business with you. The size. I remember the cooler wars in this country some years ago when the advertisement read, taste is better than size. Now I know the taste of Indian banking is good, but the size is just as important, and I think that's probably what we now need. Mr. Bhatt, I would only urge you, you have your colleagues, your peers have recognized in you the ability to withstand unwholesome pressure. They've recognized in you remarkable talent and vision to expand, to grow, to turn every crisis into an opportunity, to translate India's dream and India's energy into something tangible in terms of holdings of a bank, in terms of branches of a bank. But I do urge you, and I say this, being in government, I say this, please push us, and please ask us, please nudge us, and please lead us into becoming partners with Indian banks to go and capture the world. The world is waiting to be captured, but it won't be captured by a pygmy. The world would be captured if we walk in stride with confidence, 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall, and we walk with the confidence that today we are, and you are, a large Indian bank, but tomorrow you should be a global bank. You should be a large global bank. Why shouldn't we say to ourselves that there is nothing on this earth that we cannot capture? If we can say to ourselves successfully that we can capture the moon. We've reached the moon. We've planted our flag on the moon, and we've done it better than others because others had to send a man to plant the flag. We've used a machine. We've done it without sending a man. The man will go to Mars presumably or somewhere else. But may I say, be the astronaut, be the spacewalker, be for us the man in the machine who will take us to that distant destination to capture the continents of the world. Plant the Indian flag because India deserves it, India demands it, and India is determined. We only have to discover our determination, a little bit of Hanuman in us. Somebody has to tell us that we can take the jump. And if somebody tells us, we will. Please, therefore, be the Hanuman, take us to the distant destinations. Let the World Bank, let the State Bank be the bank of the world. Today, congratulations for being the banker of our country, the banker of our dreams. Be tomorrow the banker of the world. Thank you very much and congratulations.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. It is an honor for us to gain inspiration from your address here in Mumbai. Business India would like to offer you a small token of our appreciation. May I call upon Mr. Ashok Jha, Chairman of MCX Stock Exchange, our presenting sponsor for the evening, to present a memento. Thank you, Honourable Minister, for your address. We are honoured to have had the opportunity to draw inspiration from your speech. It's a privilege for us to gain insight into your energy, your vision, your global view, and I, for one, especially enjoyed your sense of humour as well, so thank you very much. In the words, should I even dare quote the words of Mullah Nasruddin and ask the audience, what am I going to say next? But we're going to go to the climax of the evening that you've all been waiting for, which is the crowning of the Business India Best Bank 2009 award ceremony. But first, a few words about our worthy recipient. And for that, I'd like to call Mrs. Feroza Bilamoria to come and say a few words.
I planned this program and I put myself between the two best speakers of the night so that you would have a little bit of a break before you hear the best bank recipient. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to take too much time because I know you really want to hear Mr. Bhatt, but it's befitting to introduce our recipient in a befitting manner. And I know that most of you in this audience don't need to be introduced to the State Bank of India, SBI as it's popularly called. But as the bank that touches the lives of people anywhere in many ways, as its motto goes, SBI is India's, as we've heard over and over again, largest bank and is clearly a beacon of Indian banking. Take a journey across any part of this country and you can't travel more than a few kilometers without seeing the famous SBI logo. Little wonder too, with close to 12,000 branches and over 16,000 if you include those of the subsidiary banks. While SBI has been a recipient of the Business India Best Bank Award twice before, once in February 2000 and the other time in 2005, it comes as no surprise, as Leo Puri explained to you, that the jury's choice this year too was SBI. Under O.P. Bhatt, SBI has expanded into a number of new businesses, such as private equity, wealth management, and retail broking. Through its several innovative schemes, it has regained leadership position in areas like auto loans, educational loans, etc. And with an exposure of over rupees 100,000 crore, SBI is today also the largest infrastructure player in the country. Parivartan, a change management program, and the brainchild of Mr. Bhatt, is the largest ever program of its kind and started with a coverage of 130,000 employees only in a matter of 100 days. In rural India, through the business correspondents and facilitators route, SBI has touched 50,000 villages this year alone, and another 50,000 villages are being targeted by March 2010. Under the Tiny Card scheme, which employs biometric cards and fingerprint technology to authenticate customers, SBI has rolled out 2 million cards in 19 states, and next year's target is 10 million. On the corporate front, it clicked several key deals this year, including the 10,000 crore rupee for Vodafone's 3G expansion, underwriting the 8,500 crore rupee for Aircel, and the 5,500 crore rupee loan to National Thermal Power Corporation. At the helm is truly a dynamic leader, Om Prakash Bhatt, who has led the bank to even greater heights. He started his banking career as a probationary officer with the State Bank of India in 1972. During his career with State Bank, he has held several important assignments, both in India and abroad, including stints at the bank's London and Washington offices. After his return from Washington, Mr. Bhatt held a number of critical assignments, first as General Manager at Lucknow, later as Chief General Manager of the bank's Northeast Circle, and then as Managing Director of State Bank of Travancore, a subsidiary of the State Bank of India. And I believe we have the Chairman of State Bank of Travancore with us today as well. Taking over in 2007 as Chairman, Mr. Bhatt has transformed the bank, helping it increase market share across various business categories. Ladies and gentlemen, Business India is immensely proud to present State Bank of India under the dynamic leadership of Mr. O.P. Bhatt as Business India's Best Bank 2009. Join me in congratulating State Bank.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much. This is a truly a very amazing evening, very amazing, very touching, very emotional for me. I have to thank everybody. I do not know where to begin from. First, the Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, he's come all the way from Delhi, and I didn't realize till I was here sitting next to him that there is only one award, and that is me. And I have been to other award ceremonies, and there are always tons of people. Sometimes there are dozens of people, and there are so many awards given. And some of the multinationals, they give maybe 200 awards. Award for the best blue shirt and the best red tie and all kinds of things, right? But this is only one, and I didn't know. And so thank you so much for this. Thank you very much. And of course, Mr. Advani, whose brainchild it is, who's conceived this whole thing, and which is why all of us are here today. And he also never told me, one, that there's going to be only one award which I'm going to get here. And neither, only yesterday I learned that I'm supposed to be making an acceptance speech. Normally you say thank you and go away. And then this has to be slightly more substantial than that, and particularly after the kind of speakers who came, more. Mrs. Billy Moria, this evening, it's her creation. She's designed it, and I must say, I'm very impressed. I have not seen an awards ceremony like this, Mrs. Billy Moria. Mr. Dhoot, he's an old friend of mine. He's also the bank's customer. He's also the member of parliament. I can keep on talking about him, but he's also a part of this ceremony. Without him, possibly this ceremony would not have been there. So thank you very much. And of course, members of the jury, I see very few of them. I saw Dr. Khandelwal there, and of course, Mr. Liupuri, he has come and made a presentation here. Others I don't see, but my thanks to all of you for having made the mistake of selecting State Bank of India for tonight's award. Members of the Business India family who have toiled quite a bit to make all this possible, and particularly Ryan and his team who've been making rounds of my office to find out a little bit more about the State Bank of India. There is so much to know that I'm sure he's come back only with 1 or 2% of all that State Bank does. My own colleagues, I see several of them in the audience, and I'm sure there are several hundreds of thousands of them which know about this and which will watch this ceremony subsequently when it is telecast. And somebody has to go and collect the award, so I'm doing it. But it's for all of us, Whatever happened, we did it together. One man can't do a damn thing. If it wouldn't have been for all of us pulling, pushing, running. So I don't have to thank you, but we can all feel legitimately proud of what we have done to State Bank of India. It's the new State Bank of India. And the whole world admires and applauds it. And there are quite a few who are jealous of it. And jealousy is a badge of honor. So thank you, my colleagues and my friends, both here and those who are not here. And of course, the customers. At last count, 150 million. It's larger than the population of, I think, all but 4 or 5 countries in the world. Many of them in this room. Maybe there's a tiny minority in this room who is not our customer, and they don't know what they are missing. So maybe tomorrow morning there'll be longer queues in State Bank of India, all these people wanting to join the State Bank brotherhood or fraternity, whatever you call it. So thanks to all of you, because you cannot serve without a cause. You cannot become better, excellent, whatever, without a cause. And the cause for us has been customer service, whatever, customer grace, whatever you call it. And which is why we've been addressing this issue again and again and again, in one way, in another way, in a million different ways. And which is why this last year I was emboldened enough to proclaim that we are the banker to every Indian, whether or not he or she banks with us, whether it's an individual or an institution, domestic or global, because when he, she or it needs us, we'll be there. And today, what Mr. Khurshid has said is that we have to be the global bank, banker to everybody in the globe. So, he's put that challenge a little bit higher for us. I'm glad that he has done that. I'm glad that, he's set our sights onto something which is far more richer, far more formidable. And I'm sure with the colleagues that I have in State Bank of India that we will be able to achieve that also. I'm sure we'll do that. There's been some talk about what has happened in the world during the last year or more. Most of it depressing, meltdowns. At last count, I think there were about 72 US banks which had bitten the dust. Many more banks across the world, Europe, America, everywhere. And India, I don't want to dwell in it, we were not in that class at all. And Indian banks particularly, they did very well, possibly as of now, the best banking system in the world. But I do not know what I should be saying today. As I said, it's only yesterday that I learned I should be saying something. I've jotted down some points in some of these cards. But what is it that SBI did when all this crisis was hitting the world? And what is it that we did that was different from the rest of the industry? Well, for one thing, as everything was slowing down, as everybody was worried and some panicking, we grew and expanded like never before. We opened 1,000 branches every year. We recruited 33,000 people. Job layoffs were taking place, and we were recruiting 33,000 people. And for each person that we recruited, we got more than 100 applications. This is possibly the single largest recruitment of its kind anywhere in the world. We have applied to the Guinness Book of Records. Maybe we'll be there just for the recruitment. We expanded in business, in every business. We grew in infrastructure, we grew in agriculture, we grew in home loans, we grew in... Mr. Parekh is here, Deepak Parekh is very annoyed with me because I have overtaken his bank in home loans. So we expanded, we gained market share by more than 200 basis points. So one of the things that we did was that as the world was slowing down, as many constituents in India, many institutions, businesses in India were slowing down, we took that opportunity and galloped. And the results are there to see. The other thing that you did was that a downturn is also a time for consolidation. It's a time for beefing up on your productivity and efficiency. And this is what we did. And we did it in several ways. Technology for one. Even as we were opening thousands of branches and recruiting thousands of people, we also installed ATMs. I think just about a year or two ago, we had about 7,000 or 8,000 ATMs. Today, we have more than 15,000. By March, we'll be having 25,000. And guess what? When I took charge of the bank, the average hits in my ATM per day was about 200. Am I right? Today, with the number of ATMs more than doubled, the hits have also nearly doubled. It's about 350 per day. So the country needed these ATMs, and through the ATMs we were able to provide world-class service, at least as far as that particular product offering is concerned. So we introduced ATMs, we introduced mobile banking, we introduced internet banking, we introduced new products, new services. Some people have been asking me from the media that why is it the State Bank has become more aggressive? We have not become more aggressive. We have become more focused. We've become more nimble, we've become more agile, we've become more customer-centric. We have come closer to our constituents. We respond to their needs, we anticipate their needs, and we do what we think they deserve, and we try to do it to the best of our abilities, in which we have been using technology. So technology and new business processes, we've centralized everything that can be centralized. We've pushed out the branches, all the clutter that can be pushed out, so that the branches are available only for sales and service. You go there and you get world-class service, which has been acknowledged because I think we got numerous awards in customer service also. So that was the other thing that we did. And the third thing that we did in all this downturn was that we focused on energizing our employees. And we did several things because a bank is a service institution. A service institution functions only on the ability and the attitude of its employees. no matter how good technology you have, how good building, how good ambience, how good products you have, if you don't have the right people with the right mindset, you cannot deliver. And so we did a huge exercise which continues till this day for energizing our employees, for motivating them. And the challenge for us was, we, a public sector organization, we not being able to give any rewards or any incentives of the material kind, we have to compete with all the foreign banks, all the private banks, and we have to compete without any of these assets. That was the challenge that we had. And that was the challenge that we met by motivating our employees. And how we did it, even I do not know, because we did several things. Parivartan was one thing that was mentioned. It was a program which created awareness and sensitized my people to what had happened to the bank and put the bank's image in context with the rest of the industry and the economy. But more importantly, to also tell them or to help them discover that what had happened to the bank was because of they themselves. And if anybody could set the bank right, back to where its rightful place lay, it was only they who could do it. So again, as Mr. Khurshid said, we didn't get anybody from outside, we didn't recruit any new people, same salary structure, same incentive structure, everything the same. And yet these same people, ordinary people, inept people, lazy people, careless people, these same people, ordinary, produced extraordinary results. Because what I believe, what we believe, what my top management believes is, you have to accept the people for what they are. But the challenge of leadership is to make them realize what they can be and to use that stretch and tension to help them realize their potential. And that is what we did in the State Bank of India. Communication was one thing, Parivartan was another, 5, 6, 7 days conclaves with all kinds of groups of people within the organization was another. All kinds of other things we did with the help of management institutes, Indian School of Business, IIMs, Dukes. We did so many things. But this was the crux of the transformation of the State Bank of India, because without the people being motivated, without the people being on a new high, without the people having a sense of pride and belongingness about their organization, whatever we would have done would have fallen flat. So that was one of the major things that we did. And even as we did all these things, even as we were gaining market share and making competitors tear their hair out, not you, Mr. Parekh, maybe somebody else. They are here in this crowd, some of those people. So even as we were doing all these things, we did not give up the goal of social responsibility that we had. One of the reasons for creating the State Bank of India through a special act of Parliament, the mandate that was given to us both implicitly and explicitly was socio-economic development of the country. And that is one thing that we did not give up. And which is why, as Mrs. Bilimoria pointed out, last year we reached out to 50,000 unbanked villages. Now mind you, nobody told us to do that, neither the Reserve Bank of India nor the Government of India. We took upon this mandate and this target upon ourselves, and we used modern technology, we used an outsourced business model to reach out to these 50,000 unbanked villages, and maybe through that to lakhs of poor villagers who had never seen a bank in their life. This year, we will reach out to another 50,000 unbanked villages. Two things. One, we are giving them the basic banking services that they need. And what do they need? The most important thing what they need is a place to keep their money. Deposit accounts, not loans, not loans. The most important thing they need is deposit accounts, because the women do all the hard work, they earn money, and then they want to save it for a rainy day, for education, for marriage, for health or whatever it is, and the husband steals it and gets drunk over it. So these poor women in the villages, they need some place to keep their money, and we provided that. The second thing that they need is facility for remittances. As we know, Today in India, there is a huge migration of population that takes place from the poorer states like Bihar to places like Punjab or even Bombay in search of work or whatever it is. And these people have to send money back home. And I do not know how many of you know it, but to send 500 rupees back to your village in Bihar could cost you as much as 50 or 100 rupees till we stepped in. And now we have made these facilities available to these poor people. Third thing, of course, sometimes they need credit also, and which you do give them. So we did that. We went into self-help groups. 47% of the self-help groups in India are financed by us. One bank is doing 47% of the self-help groups. Education loans, the largest number. I don't have the number, but I mean, it's I think, again, about 47% or 43%. It's plus 40% of the education loans in this country given by State Bank of India. Retail, auto, this, that, we've done a lot. But what we have also done is that we have adopted poor, destitute, orphan, girl children across the country. At the last count, the number was 20,000. We've got less than 20,000 branches. Each branch has adopted at least one girl child. This idea first came from my wife. She pestered me. I didn't do anything. Then she pestered others. And something happened, and soon there was a movement, And what is different about this girl child adoption? I mean, why girl child? I don't have to tell you. I mean, if the women in this country are not strong and educated, the country can never be strong and educated because they run families and they run communities and they run societies. In some cases, they also run countries. But what is unique to this program that we have is it is not that we give money for education, fees or uniform. We do all that. And that is the easiest part for a bank which is making a profit of $2 billion a year. What we also provide in addition, and that is the important part, is we provide mentoring service to these children. The ladies of the State Bank of India, those who work and those who are spouses, they adopt 1, 2 or more of these girls and they become a foster parent. So this poor girl child has a role model to look to. If she's ill, if she's depressed, if she needs to talk to somebody, if it's her birthday or something like that, there is somebody from outside her social milieu who is available on call actually. So providing emotional support, providing mentoring and coaching is one of the most unique features of this girl adoption child that we have, and it is all over the country, all over the country. So that is the other thing that we did. We have also introduced a rural talent scheme. Many of us come from schools which are from urban and metropolitan areas, and these schools are known nationally, sometimes internationally also. And because we have that pedigree in terms of education, there is a certain advantage that we have. But there are thousands of schools across the country in rural areas, semi-urban areas, who may be equally good, where the students and the teachers may be equally good, but they go unsung, unrecognized. So what we did is we introduced a Rural Talent Award for these schools. Every year we recognize the best performers in various commerce, arts, science, etc., etc. We guarantee them an education loan. We put some money in their account. We create a small function in which we call the district collector across the country at 10,000 places just to reward these people so that not only they feel encouraged, but because these people are felicitated and rewarded in a public function, it encourages every student in their school to aspire and try to become that next year. So collectively, the standards of education, the standards of aspiration, are sort of going up, or so we believe. Then of course, we have been very aggressive about interest rates. Our home loan rates are 8%, the lowest in the country. In the last quarter, we got 75,000 applications for home loans. 25,000 were for home loans less than 5 lakhs, which we gave for 8%. What kind of a home can you get for 5 lakhs? And who are these people who need these homes? And why is it that State Bank of India is helping these people? Why is State Bank of India doing all these crazy things with girl child and with development of the rural areas? Not that we are neglecting internationally. We have been recognized as number one in terms of international, mandated loan arrangers and book runners and all that. Number one in the world. So whether it is international or domestic, whether it is small self-help group people or whether it is large corporates, everywhere we are creating a stamp for ourselves. But why? And that is a slightly philosophical question. You need to have a point of view. You need to have a vision. You need to be able to stand and say that, look, I stand for these things. So let me digress a little bit. What has happened is that particularly in the last century, the 20th century, it witnessed the emergence of a very new creature which even Charles Darwin had not recognized, and that was the emergence of large global institutions. Historically, never before could an individual or a tribe or a nation destroy thousands of species in a year, or contribute to global warming, or pollute the atmosphere. But these large institutions can and are doing it. That is one of the changes that has come about in the last few decades. The other thing that has happened is that almost simultaneously, a global culture of instant communication, very strong individualism and material acquisition has been spawned. And what this global culture is doing is that it is threatening traditional family, social and religious structures. Disharmony is very much in the air across societies, across countries, everywhere. And maybe one of the byproducts of globalization. So what has happened is, despite all the GDP growth, despite all the progress and all the prosperity, the divide between the haves and the have-nots, the divide between those who are digitally empowered and those who are not so empowered has widened. Even if you look at India, we have got roughly about 600 districts. More than 150 of them, I think there is no administration there. There are Naxalites and there are all kinds of people, and the rule of law is not there. And this number seems to be increasing. Even during the last 4 or 5 years, and India grew at unprecedented growth rates, 8%, 9%, 9% plus. But this divide in the country did not slow down. It also grew. So that is one of the things that has been happening. So the growth model which is there, whether it is sustainable or whether it is pervasively unsustainable, is one of the issues for which there is no answer. A lot of other changes have been happening. Increasing the world has become a knowledge economy. Even in India, which is an emerging and many times called a developing country, it is the service sector which contributes more than 50% to our GDP. Agriculture is just about 17 or 18, and industry is somewhere in the 20s. It is the services sector. And in the services sector, more and more work is done by machines, and the people that are employed, they need to have some brains. Even in factories, and you would all know that, if you look at, say, the factories of Tata's or the scooter manufacturers, say Hero Honda or whatever it is, you will find that today for producing twice, 3 times or 4 times as many number of vehicles, they employ half or 1/4 of the number of people that they used to employ before. So all these people who are employed there, they are not doing the kind of routine jobs that Charlie Chaplin, in that film they showed Charlie Chaplin used to do, just, turning a wrench all the time, and he almost grew mad. These people are knowledge workers. And how do you motivate a knowledge worker? He works with his brains and with his attitude. You can skill him. But what will you do with his attitude? If he doesn't want to serve the customer, if he doesn't want to smile, if he doesn't want to be graceful, what do you do with him? And increasingly, more and more businesses, more and more industries, more and more institutions will have more and more knowledge workers. And the old style of motivating them through fear or reward is not functioning anymore. And there are many things that have happened. The other thing that has happened is that we have smarter children now. And they are so smart that most of us parents are not able to communicate with them at all. These children, we think they are wasting their time. He's on the internet. He's also talking on the cell phone. He's listening to loud music which you don't like. And he's also doing his maths homework. All of it together. And you think, he's fibbing or he's fooling you. But actually he or she can do all of it together. They can actually multitask. We think that they can't, but they can. We were not able to do that when we were kids because maybe there was not so much in the world there. I was a child, I remember, we didn't even have a radio at my home and I used to go to school on a cycle. And today, these kids have broadband access. So how do you relate to a child like this? How do you relate to a knowledge worker who functions differently? You know, whose levers and springs with which he acts and reacts are different. How do you find those things? So many of these things have changed in the world. And one important change that has come about is that today, possibly for the first time in recorded history, it is possible. It's not a certainty, but there is a possibility that we may be able to banish poverty and hunger from this world. Technology, genetic engineering, new ways of harvesting water or reaching them to the crops drop by drop through drip irrigation, genetic seeds. It is possible to do all of it. It's definitely possible to do all of it. But will it happen? I don't know. Possibility, as I said, is there. Certainty is not there. Because, again, the current systems that we have, whether it is legal or political or economic, the current system is somehow not able to deliver enough oomph, for want of a better word, to make that happen. And imagine at a time when we are almost on the cusp of eradicating all these things, poverty, hunger, disease, etc., we also have this challenge of mobilizing resources, largely mental resources, largely resources of leadership to achieve these things. And we do not know whether it will happen or not. So what has all this got to do with SBI as it is today, or what SBI is doing in, so-called non-banking spheres? We believe today that among all the creatures on earth, institutions have become very powerful. And therefore, the responsibility that they have is huge. They have to lead and they have to show the way. In many ways, the leading that they have to do has to come from foresight, has to come from intuition. The lead of a leader usually comes from his ability to be connected to the future, which is something all of us can actually do, but which is something very few of us do. So even as you live and breathe and lead and work, whatever you do, so at one level you are connected with present day reality. You are aware of what is happening, you are concerned, you are responsive, you are positive, etc., etc. But simultaneously at another level, you should be able to watch what you are doing, what events are happening, and to be able to watch it in a broad sweep of history so that you are able to see the past, what is happening today, and almost without any intent to be able to see that sweep into the future as well. It is only when you can do that that you will be able to lead. So you must know what are the seeds of the past. You must know what is happening today, what tension, what trauma, what trouble it is causing today. And you must know how to lead your institution and possibly help in leading the world out of these things. And therefore, some of these things that we are doing maybe not exactly will do what I am saying should be done, but these are small seeds, small contributions to ignite the fire in other minds, to ignite the genius, to ignite the ability, to ignite the potential, so that others can also try and strive to do whatever they have to do, but also to do something plus in these areas. I thought here, in this august company that we have here, distinguished guests, elite people sitting here, I thought, being the largest bank, getting an award of the kind we are getting in the area of banking, I thought it was also important for me to say that we also do banking, But there are so many other things that we do which I think are far more important. And all these important things, they have a backward loop into banking, whichever way. It all comes back. It's a big virtuous loop. And now, having got this award from the hands of Mr. Khurshid, but also in the presence of such a distinguished audience, what I feel is that this has given all of us in State Bank of India even greater responsibility towards our institutions, towards our customers, towards our community, and towards our country. And I swear by God that we will do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Butt. That was truly an inspiring presentation. I'm sure all of us are in agreement, especially after that wonderful speech, that the award is rightfully the State Bank of India's this year. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed for drinks and dinner, all that remains is for me to thank those who made this evening possible. Our most grateful thanks to our chief guest, Mr. Khurshid, for flying into Mumbai along with Mrs. Khurshid to grace this occasion and make it so very special. Mr. and Mrs. Khurshid have kindly agreed to stay with us through dinner, so our distinguished guests will have an opportunity to meet them in person. Thank you. Our thanks to MCX Stock Exchange, our presenting sponsors. Thanks to Videocon Industries Limited, our principal sponsor. Thanks to Capgemini Financial Services India, our co-sponsor. Appreciation and thanks to NDTV Profit, our exclusive telecast partner, who will be airing this event on their enormously popular channel on Saturday, the 22nd of August at 6 p.m. and Sunday, the 23rd of August at 4:30 p.m. Our thanks too to Shivas, who have so kindly provided the alcohol for this evening. To the Taj Mahal Palace and Tower, Mumbai, our hospitality partners. And ladies and gentlemen, it only remains for me to thank you for being such a wonderful audience this evening. Please join us for drinks and dinner further down the corridor at the Gateway and Princess Rooms, and we do hope you'll stay for the rest of the evening and have a wonderful time. Thank you and good night.